A California jury hands down a verdict for Ramesh Sunny Balwani, former Theranos executive and ex-boyfriend of founder Elizabeth Holmes. Plus, the man who attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan speaks out for the first time since his release.
I'm not sure they could forgive me, and I probably wouldn't even blame them if they don't forgive me. If I could take it back, I surely would.
And what to expect at the coming Parkland School shooting penalty trial.
I'm going to expect from both sides that you all pre-try your witnesses so that they don't have diarrhea of the mouth or say something that's inappropriate on the stand.
But first, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin learns his sentence for his federal case in the death of George Floyd. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. A nearly 21-year federal prison sentence is handed down to Derek Chauvin, the ex-Minnesota police officer convicted in the death of George Floyd. After pleading guilty to federal charges late last year, a judge handed down the 252-month sentence on Thursday, with a subtracted 8 months for time served. Cameras were not allowed inside the federal courtroom, but reporters there say Chauvin addressed George Floyd's family, saying in part, quote, "I wish them all the best in their life and that they'll have excellent guidance in the rest of their life." Floyd's brother asked the judge to give Chauvin the maximum consecutive sentence, while his attorney argued for 20 years, saying Chauvin is not a flight risk and has shown respect for the court. These federal civil rights charges stem from the 2020 murder of George Floyd. Floyd, an unarmed black man, repeatedly yelled, "I can't breathe," as Chauvin knelt on his neck for nearly 10 minutes. In 2021, Chauvin was convicted on state charges of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in Floyd's death. He was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison and 5 years of supervised release. U.S. attorneys now say Chauvin's federal sentence will run concurrently with the state sentence. Joining us today is legal analyst Marie Pereira and co-host Terry Austin. Marie, where will Chauvin serve his time, and is there a preference or reason for one or the other?
Most likely, he will serve it in federal prison, and I think that was his strategy in the first place for just pleading guilty to those federal charges, because federal prison has a different type of population. The prisoners in federal prison are less violent, it's less crowded, the cellmates are less, and even the activities they force the defendants to engage in state prison, they don't do that to federal prisoners. They don't have assigned duties. The only downside is with federal prison, they are prone to transfer you to other states without notice, and state prisons, they transfer their prisoners less often.
Yeah, I bet you Chauvin's probably happy about the federal as well, because no one in federal prison is someone that he may have arrested in the past. Well, Terry, Felonious Floyd, George Floyd's brother, spoke at Chauvin's sentencing, asking for the maximum time to run consecutively, but that won't happen. So how will Chauvin's sentence work?
You know, it is understandable that George Floyd's brother would want the maximum. He would want those state and federal sentences to run consecutively, but it's not going to work that way. Part of the plea deal was that it would run concurrently and that he would also serve that time, as Marie already mentioned, in federal prison, because it's a much better place for most people to go. But we already know that he began serving some of his time in state court, so he'll get credit for that. And we do know Minnesota law provides that you absolutely get time off for good behavior, and it is 2/3. And so if he is good, he'll probably be out in about 13 years.
Yeah, and then he'll probably continue to serve that federal time and then get out. Makes more sense because you don't have to, as Maria said, get bounced back and forth between one jail to another. Well, in other federal news, convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell appeals her conviction just days after a sentence is handed down. Last month, the British socialite was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her crimes. In December of last year, she was convicted on 5 sex crime charges stemming from her relationship with the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. Prosecutors say Maxwell lured young girls into Epstein's orbit and groomed them into sex trafficking. 9 days after her sentence was handed down, Maxwell filed an appeal that could stretch on for months. Previously, Maxwell's defense team claimed prosecutors did not prove their client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, saying they waited too long to indict her. Defense attorneys also called for a new trial or thrown out conviction after news broke that a juror failed to disclose his childhood sexual abuse on the jury questionnaire. And in Colorado, the defendant's car becomes the focus of testimony as Kevin Dean Eastman is tried for the double murder of his ex-girlfriend and her new love interest. Eastman is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with the deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence. He allegedly killed his ex-girlfriend Heather Frank and local Greeley, Colorado musician Stanley Scott Sessions on separate days in February 2020, in what prosecutors say appears to have been a love triangle. Prosecutors have called the throat-slitting murder of Sessions an ambush, and that Eastman fatally shot Frank to silence the only witness to Sessions' killing. Frank and Eastman both had arrest warrants in connection to Sessions' murder, but before Frank's body was found. Investigators say Eastman burned Sessions' body and was allegedly preparing to burn Frank's body as well when law enforcement arrested him at a gas station. On Thursday, a crime scene investigator testified she was asked about Eastman's vehicle, saying there was damage to the front of it and that it was found with the rear seats folded down. On cross-examination, Eastman's defense attorney asked her what they found inside his car.
And as we just talked about, you carefully were looking for any type of stains in Mr. Eastman's vehicle,
Yes,
just like you did in Mr. Sessions' vehicle,
correct.
because you were trying to locate any potential blood.
Yes,
And you did find 1 stain in Mr. Eastman's vehicle that had an odor of petroleum-based fuel.
yes,
You also located 7 stains in various other portions of the vehicle.
yes. Some of which were consistent with potential blood, some of which were unusual stains that required further testing.
Okay. You tested each one of those 7 stains in Mr. Eastman's vehicle.
I did.
And all 7 of those stains failed to yield a color change consistent with a presumptive positive result for the presence of blood.
Yes, in the screening test they did.
There was no evidence that anyone was killed in Mr. Eastman's vehicle.
No.
Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, 41 years after an assassination attempt on President Reagan, John Hinckley Jr. speaks out for the first time. But first, a verdict is handed down in the federal trial of former Theranos COO Ramesh Sunny Balwani. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. Ramesh Sunny Balwani, the former COO of Theranos and ex-boyfriend of its founder Elizabeth Holmes, is found guilty in federal court for his role in the company's downfall. A jury convicted Balwani of 12 counts of fraud and conspiracy for defrauding investors and patients in Theranos. Theranos was a $9 billion blood testing startup which touted itself to have revolutionary breakthrough technology in blood testing. Despite flashy promises of using just a few drops of blood to conduct a wider range of health tests, the technology didn't exist. Theranos raised more than $900 million from investors. It came crashing down when a Wall Street Journal investigation began in 2015, revealing holes in technological capabilities. The conviction comes roughly 6 months after Theranos' founder, Elizabeth Holmes, was found guilty of 4 of 11 federal fraud and conspiracy charges. Balwani is set to be sentenced in November. He faces up to 20 years in prison on each count, a fine of $250,000 plus restitution. Holmes' sentencing hearing is currently scheduled for September. Terry, Balwani was found guilty of all charges, unlike Holmes. Why do you think that was?
Brian, you're right. He was found guilty on all 12 charges, and that included defrauding both patients and investors. And as you said, we know that Holmes was only basically found guilty 4 of 7 charges, and that all related to investors. She wasn't found guilty for any charges relating to patients. I think it's because Balwani was the COO. No question he had a more hands-on position. He actually oversaw the laboratory for patient samples. So he had more day-to-day involvement, and I think the jury determined because of that, he not only defrauded investors, but he also defrauded some of those patients.
Yeah, that makes sense with the additional charges there. Now, Marie, the federal government got 2 convictions on entrepreneurs that lied and used hyperbole to sell a very important medical device. Do you think this verdict will affect how other entrepreneurs market or sell their medical devices in the future?
Absolutely. I think this sends a message. The fact that they went after him criminally and not civilly, says, you know what, we're not tolerating this. It sends a message to ambitious and deceptive entrepreneurs who embellish, who defraud, not only take people's wealth from them, but this guy was affecting people's health because he claimed he had a machine with a drop of blood that could diagnose 200 different ailments and was misdiagnosing a vulnerable public. So not only did he hurt the wealth of society, he hurt society's health as well. And I think it sends a message that we're not tolerating this. Think first before you say, let me fake it until I make it.
Yeah, we'll see how this plays out for hopefully never seeing future cases like this again. Well, Adam Montgomery, the father of missing New Hampshire girl Harmony Montgomery, is facing new charges not connected to his 8-year-old daughter's disappearance. Harmony was last seen in 2019 when she was living with her father and stepmother in Manchester, New Hampshire. Harmony wasn't officially reported missing until nearly 2 years later. Officials say Adam told Child Protective Services that the girl had been living with her mother, Crystal Sorey. Sorey says that isn't true. Adam is being held on charges of abusing Harmony before she went missing. But so far, no one has been charged in connection to her disappearance. Kayla Montgomery, Adam's estranged wife, was charged with fraud for collecting food stamps in Harmony's name after the girl went missing. The new indictments related to Adam allegedly stealing a rifle and shotgun in 2019 include charges of theft and being a felon in possession of a weapon. Adam is set to go to trial for the theft and other charges in November. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, we look ahead to the penalty phase for the Parkland school shooter. Plus, for the first time since his release, John Hinckley Jr. breaks his silence, what he says about gun violence in America. Welcome back. For the first time since his release from court supervision, we're hearing from John Hinckley Jr., the man who attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. Back in 1981, a then 25-year-old Hinckley shot and injured President Reagan, a police officer, and a Secret Service agent. At the time, Hinckley says he was depressed and in isolation and became obsessed with the movie Taxi Driver, starring Jodie Foster. Hinckley later claimed he shot the president to impress Foster. He was convicted of 13 crimes, but later acquitted by reason of insanity. Hinckley was diagnosed with 5 mental disorders, including borderline and narcissistic personality disorder, as well as major depression. He spent 41 years under medical supervision, majority of that in a psychiatric hospital in Washington, D.C. After that, he moved in with his mother, where his movements and medical status were monitored by the court. Last month, he was officially freed from all court oversight. In an exclusive interview with ABC's Nightline, Hinckley called for stronger gun restrictions in the United States.
Can you understand why some would see you as a danger to society?
Not now, no.
Why?
Because I'm not. If they want to think I'm the person that I was 41 years ago, yes, I could see that, but that's not the person I am now. I certainly don't think the mentally ill should have access to guns. I mean, that's kind of obvious. Background checks are good and waiting periods are good. I think there's too many guns in America.
And coming from you, that's quite a statement.
Well, I hope it is. Because that's the way I feel.
So Terry, we touched on it a little bit, but Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and sometimes people think, well, they just get to walk free. But what was his life like being found not guilty by that reason?
Well, he certainly did not walk free. As you mentioned, he was at St. Elizabeth's Hospital for 41 years. He actually tweeted that he was there for 41 years, 2 months, and 15 days. So he was counting those days. He was under psychiatric care. He was actually on medication. He mentioned during that interview that he went to both individual and group therapy. So he was trying to get better, and finally a judge determined that he was better, and he was put on restrictions with his mother, and now he's completely free. I think, there might be mixed feelings about that, but on the one hand, it does show that people can get better and that there is some hope. Other people may want him to stay in forever, regardless of whether or not he's better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Different people having different opinions there. Marie, what can this case, conviction, and hospitalization teach us about mental health and gun violence in America as we are in the midst of shooting after shooting?
mental health and gun violence appear to go hand in hand. Coming from his own mouth, Mr. Hinckley, after 41 years in the system, getting intensive mental health treatment, being medicated, I'm sure, he is telling us that there is too much easy access to automatic weapons and that there need to be a tighter control and more background checks. Coming from someone who came from that place and what happened to him, what he did to the president. It's very, very telling that he is advising us to have better gun control laws.
Yeah, it's one more voice to the choir of asking for some kind of reform or some kind of change. I'll be curious to see how much that weighs in a decision to have change in this country for gun control and gun violence. Well, when we come back, the Parkland school shooting. A Florida judge sets guidelines for the nearly 2,000 witnesses involved in the coming penalty phase trial. Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. Months after being convicted and sentenced for the decade-old murder of NBA player Lorenzen Wright, his killer Billy Ray Turner faces a second sentencing on other related charges. Wright was shot to death in July 2010, his body found days later in a wooded area outside Memphis, Tennessee. For 7 years, his case went cold. Then, in 2017, Turner and Wright's ex-wife, Shira Wright, were arrested in connection to his murder. In March, a jury found Turner guilty of first-degree murder in the shooting death of the Memphis Grizzlies players after just a couple hours of deliberations. He was sentenced to life in prison. Shira was sentenced to 30 years in prison after pleading guilty to her involvement in her ex-husband's death. Turner was also found guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy charges, which held a possible 15 to 25 years in prison. On Friday, a judge sentenced him to 2 25-year sentences. He will serve a total sentence of life plus 41 years for his involvement in Wright's murder. Heading south to Florida, a Broward County judge rules all witnesses must be pre-tried by attorneys before testifying in the coming penalty phase trial of the Parkland school shooter. Back in 2018, the gunman opened fire at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. 17 people were killed and 17 more injured. Last October, the gunman pled guilty to all charges. After a lengthy jury selection and multiple delays, the upcoming death penalty trial is expected to begin on July 18th. In a series of pretrial hearings this week, Judge Elizabeth Scheer ruled the state must conclude witness testimony by August 19th, nearly 1 month after opening statements are expected to be presented. Both sides also discussed the sensitive nature of witness testimony from thousands of witnesses. The state's witness list includes 1,100 names, while the defense's list includes more than 300. On Thursday, Judge Schreier noted both sides must pre-try witnesses before they take the stand.
I can't rule on every single issue that may possibly come up. I understand your concern, but I think you putting the state on notice and so that they have the opportunity to pre-try their witness in the way that they want to and make sure, I'm going to expect from both sides that you all pre-try your witnesses so that they don't have diarrhea of the mouth or say something that's inappropriate on the stand. And so if you want, I'll issue, this is a standing order. I expect at this level, both sides to pre-try all of their witnesses and to go over sensitive areas that the witness may or may not know they're allowed to talk about. And I'm also going to be paying very close attention so that if I see something that's coming, I'll be either interrupting or waiting for an objection. In other words, if I can see where a witness is going and it's in a place that's not going to be good, I might say, can we have a quick sidebar, something to that effect?
All right, so when it comes to legal terms, diarrhea of the mouth, I know that one, but what does it mean, Maria, to pre-try a case, and why do you think the judge wants that to happen?
I think basically she's saying if you're calling these witnesses, you need to prep your witnesses and let them know what is acceptable and what is not, because I don't want this case filled with objections and sidebars. They're your witnesses, control your witnesses. Basically, that's what the judge is trying to say. I'll do my part. but I don't expect that the witnesses are going to come in blindly and not know the rules of the court and some rules of evidentiary evidence by I almost said a patient, by a witness on a stand.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to say it's not like an actual trial before the trial. It's more like an advanced form of prep. Well, Terry, the defense argues that the use of too many photos or certain evidence may inflame the jury and prevent them from coming to an impartial verdict. So where does the line get drawn for using hundreds, dozens, or just one photo?
You know what, Brian? It's not an easy line to draw, and I think Judge Shearer has her work cut out for her. There are over 450 photos and videos. The prosecution wants all of that in. The defense has argued that it wants less in. And the prosecution basically said, look, for just one victim, there are at least 11 photos. And we see that there are 34 people who were shot, 17 of whom died. What Judge Shearer said she was going to do is look at each of these on a case-by-case basis. She's not going to make a blanket determination, and she has to figure out what is inflammatory and what's redundant. I think she can do it.
Yeah, I mean, even if you do, what, 10 each, it's 3, I mean, it's a lot. Math's not my strongest subject, but thank you both for joining us, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.